Welcome to Breaking Down Bergman. I'm David Friend.
And I'm Sonia Strimban.
We are looking at Autumn Sonata.
Tycker du om mig?
Jag älskar dig.
Det är inte sant.
Eva lilla, kommer du möjligen ihåg att jag avbröt min karriär för att kunna stanna hemma hos dig och pappa?
Kommer du möjligen ihåg att det var din ryggskada som gjorde att du inte längre kunde öva 6 timmar om dagen? Så du spelade sämre och sämre. Fick sämre och sämre kritik. Har du glömt det?
Eva!
Jag vet inte vilket som är värst. Tiden du var hemma och spelade maka och mor. Eller tiden du var på turné. Men jag tänker på det och jag förstår att du gjorde ett helvete för oss. Både för pappa och mig.
Men Eva lilla, det är inte sant. Pappa och jag var mycket lyckliga tillsammans. Josef älskade mig. Och jag kunde ha gjort vad som helst för honom.
Ja visst. Du bedrog honom.
Jag bedrog honom inte! Jag var hela tiden fullkomligt uppriktig mot pappa. Jag blev kär i Martin och jag reste bort med honom i 8 månader. Tror du att den tiden var någon dans på rosor?
Det var i alla fall jag som fick sitta med pappa på kvällarna. Det var jag som fick trösta honom. Det var jag som hela tiden fick upprepa att du nog trots allt älskade honom. Att du helt säkert skulle komma tillbaka. Det var jag som fick läsa upp dina brev. Dina långa, kärleksfulla, lustiga brev. Där du berättade valda avsnitt från dina intressanta resor. Vi satt där som 2 enfaldiga idioter och läste upp dina brev. 2 gånger, 3 gånger. Vi tyckte att det fanns inte en underbarare person än dig.
Eva, du hatar mig.
Autumn Sonata is certainly one of the more accessible films in Bergman's career, and definitely one that I think we found easier to watch, just because the plotline is so linear.
Especially on the heels of Serpent's Egg, which we found rather messy. I found this film to be fairly well organized, and there weren't too many loose ends.
Part of that might be due to the fact of who's in front of the screen. We have Ingrid Bergman. This was sort of a legendary production, this unusual pairing of a Bergman behind the camera and a Bergman in front of the camera. But I think that she lends a certain Hollywood feel to the film. Even though she's speaking mostly in Swedish, occasionally in English, there is accessibility, I felt.
It was interesting to see 2 very different types of screen actresses in the same film. Ingrid Bergman being from the Hollywood tradition, and Liv Ullmann, who has been acting with Bergman for years from Sweden. And it was particularly noticeable the positive and strong chemistry between Ingrid and Liv in comparison to the very poor chemistry and the flatness of David Carradine, also a Hollywood actor, with Liv in the previous film.
Yeah, there were definitely more fireworks here when in Serpent's Egg it almost felt kind of soggy, the relationship between them. But here it's just so solid. Every moment seems to just have this glimmer of emotion and power. And I think that really elevated the script that was really well structured, but also gave a lot of care and attention to the relationships between these 2 women. And I think that's very interesting how Bergman chose to portray the relationships between a mother and a daughter in this film in particular.
What I really liked about Autumn Sonata was the fact that Bergman took a real chance to focus on the mother-daughter dynamic throughout the entire film. He has given us glimpses of that in other productions, but never really put it out there at front and center and tried to position both of those roles as kind of either a protagonist or an antagonist and really create a controversial situation between the 2 of them and then explore that.
I think that he hit on some real truths in this film as well, just like Scenes from a Marriage before it, where he was experimenting and exploring ideas that he had in the past, but he found new details. And I think there are moments in Autumn Sonata that really resonated with me, being neither a mother nor a daughter. But especially when Liv is sitting at the piano watching her mother show her how it is done properly from a professional, from an experienced woman. There was something within that moment that struck me.
For me, that scene is particularly strong because I think in mother-daughter relationships, there's always an inherent element of rivalry, whether it's, in the foreground or in the background. It always somehow exists, and in this case in particular, because the mother is a performer, she is that kind of super ego persona on the front of the stage, always needs to be adored, always needs to be the best. As a concert pianist, there's an elevated sense of tension between the two characters. So I liked how he really brought it through the music and the performance element. And it's not something that's foreign. In a lot of the women-to-women relationships that Bergman has shown us, there's always been that element of rivalry or jealousy or one trying to get ahead of the other.
Which, as an observer, sort of raises the question of why would Bergman choose to tell this story with women? Because, of course, if we put aside all of his past work, he could tell this story with men. But in my opinion, I don't think we would reach the same sort of dramatic intensity, and even more importantly, the honesty that comes through in Autumn Sonata.
It seems that Bergman finds the theme of psychology somehow more accessible through female characters. And for me in particular with this film, somehow the way that he presented, whether it was trauma, crises, or catharsis, or any kind of, psychological revelation throughout the film, it was always very pathological, like more so than some of the recent films that we've seen where psychology was a factor, even more so than Face to Face, where the actual character of Liv Ullmann is a psychotherapist. Here it seems almost like he was researching psychology in the background, or how people would get diagnosed, like, typical childhood traumas, and then try to interpret them in an artistic way on the screen. And maybe because he was doing that, we didn't see as much distortion or as much mess or as many loose ends as we would typically see where he approached it in a really freestyle kind of way. So for example, one common kind of pathological thing that's attributed to childhood psychology is this element of repression. When kids go through trauma in early childhood, a lot of times they repress those memories. It's kind of like a coping mechanism in order for them to mature and go on in a quote-unquote normal way. So both of her daughters suffer consequences in adulthood based on the abandonment they felt as children when they were really, really young. Eva is unable to carry relationships with other people. Her husband has this whole dialogue with the mother about how she was kind of cold and withdrawn and very reserved up until the point where she got pregnant and had a child of her own. And later, much later in the film, we see this very cathartic scene where Eva comes clean to her mother about her true emotions, which actually, as she got older and older, turned into very vehement hate. With the younger sister, Helena, Eva accuses Ingrid Bergman's character to have actually caused her physical ailment, which looks like it's multiple sclerosis, but Eva believes that those are actually the unresolved emotional issues that were in Helena since her childhood.
I think it's important to note that often when these women have these illnesses that are taking over their bodies, it's never disclosed what they are. Bergman always makes it clear that they're sick, they might be dying, it's definitely overpowering them, but he never actually diagnoses them, which I think is a key point to understanding what he's really doing here and why these characters are the way that they are.
I think you can actually link that to Bergman himself, because as we've seen throughout his filmography, Bergman's own physical ailments and his trips to hospitals and things like that always affected his ability to create film and to interact with other people and to maintain relationships with his actors.
But it was always a question if they were psychosomatic.
Yeah, but it's not untrue, right?
But Bergman also tackles here not just sickness of the body, but also an illness of the mind in a different way. When you think about Eva's character and how she has face the loss of her son, he makes some very bold decisions in terms of how he's going to portray it. One, how she dealt with the loss of her child, and two, how she has sort of coped with that in the present day. So when we talk about the accident, her son drowned, I thought it was interesting to note that in the movie, she doesn't really seem to show a lot of remorse for it. And in that, I mean, she doesn't blame herself. When I was putting it together in my mind, I was thinking, as the mother of a child, even if you were not at all responsible for the death, you might somehow find a way to link together the pieces and indirectly blame yourself. Eva does not do that. She has, in some ways, replaced her son with her sister, who, with her illness, has sort of become a child in herself.
Kind of like a surrogate. The other interesting thing about the way that Eva deals with the death of her son is by sort of not admitting that he's dead. Like, she knows that he's not physically present, he's not around her, but she creates some kind of spiritual alter ego of her son, which only she can sense and only she can access, and she feels that he's still with her.
In some ways, that might actually relate to her relationship with her mother. I think we see a lot of parallels between the two. And while her mother wasn't present, I think she saw herself and her daughter as connected, even though she wasn't, and her daughter does not feel the same way. When she was out touring, performing, she felt like she was still there. And then maybe later in life, now that she's come to hear what her daughter thinks, she realizes the reality of the situation a little bit more, but...
and that she's culpable. I think the sense of guilt and remorse is interesting, the way it transitions kind of from one generation to another. So, for example, you mentioned that Eva doesn't seem to feel a sense of guilt over her son's death, but we see that her mother, or his grandmother, does seem to have some kind of uncomfortable sense around it. When she's having an intimate conversation with Eva's husband, and he tells about the drowning of their child, Eric, and he shows her a very sweet photo of the boy, it makes her feel very uncomfortable. She doesn't want to engage with it. We learn that she missed the funeral. She never attended. I think she does feel a sense of remorse, even if it's subconscious, for the way that she did not engage with her children. And she probably gets that they resent her for it in some capacity. And I think the fact that she's been completely absent and abstained from Eric's development and growth, even in his short 4 years, weighs on her. It's kind of like a manifestation of the guilt she's always carried.
Bergman makes a lot of suggestions that this is a vicious cycle that will be continued for generations. We see it late in the film when Eva's arguing with her mother and leaving her sister Helena basically crying on the floor. It's falling on deaf ears. These women aren't responding to the person who's really in need. They're so self-involved with their own conflict that they don't care about the external world.
Either don't care or don't notice. There's some kind of level of distance or abstinence that they create. It's also interesting to me to see how they're unable to protect each other. You know, you have mother, daughter, younger sister, and you would think that there would be some kind of bond where their love or their sense of duty or obligation to care for each other would protect them. I'm thinking in particular of that very strange scene, which is kind of a flashback to their childhood, where it's revealed that Charlotte, the mother, her boyfriend Leonardo actually molests her little daughter Helena, and this is before her illness fully manifested itself. But no one is able to protect her, and yet they're all kind of there, so they're kind of complicit, but nobody seems to be willing or able to prevent this.
That's certainly one of the more extreme examples in the film, but I think there's an overall disconnect between every single individual, and there's moments where Bergman really expresses this. For example, when Charlotte the mother is speaking with Eva's husband, they're talking about Eva's emotions, and her husband in particular is addressing how Eva dealt with the death of her son and how that sort of progressed with her emotions. And Eva overhears it. She eavesdrops on the conversation and sort of understands certain things about her husband and her mother that she wouldn't have ever heard face to face with any of them. And later on in the film, Eva talks directly to her mother, while her husband eavesdrops on her, understanding certain emotions that she felt about her husband at the time and how their relationship was. There is a lot of time that's spent in the film where people are speaking to other people about important emotional moments that they should be expressing to each other, and they never do, and they possibly never will. There's the scene near the end of the film where Eva writes a letter to her mother, basically expressing all of her emotions and perhaps leading to a reconciliation, but her husband is the one who ultimately mails the letter, or doesn't. We don't actually know if he intervenes in what could be a reconciliation of their relationship. But again, there's sort of this middleman in the message that's being delivered, and that middleman is the one who could either put a wall between two people or not.
Aside from the main characters, the men in the film play a very peripheral role, which is something we've seen Bergman do before, but they all have a significant contribution to add. So for example, Charlotte's agent, who does all of her global bookings for her concerts, he never actually speaks in the film, but she speaks to him quite openly, and it's the only really English-speaking parts, and she divulges a lot about herself that is quite revealing about her character. So he's kind of like this mirror, or this kind of open door that lets us see more into her. The husband also, while not quite as in the background, he helps us to interpret a lot of the emotional turmoil and the inability to communicate of true feelings or true traumas between the three female characters in the film. And thirdly, there's Charlotte's boyfriend, Leonardo, who we actually see passing away in the film. We see both his dead body in the hospital as well as a shot towards his funeral. And he's there to help us better understand and access how this whole situation came to be. Why Charlotte is all of a sudden, after being absent for decades, essentially, is really willing to spend really close family time with her daughters, who she's always kind of held at arm's length. It's the fact that she's becoming a little bit afraid of her own age, her own mortality, maybe unresolved issues from the past, and she's trying to find kind of accessible ways or a reason to confront those things. I think the way that Bergman often signals to us whether a character is, you know, the antagonist or the protagonist is by how he portrays them. So in this case in particular, I'm thinking that, you know, although Charlotte is a challenging character and she doesn't have too many redeeming traits, I think that's fine. He portrays her as human. What's interesting is the way that he portrays Eva. She's mousy, she's homely, she's not as glamorous as her mother, she has moments of rivalry and jealousy and contempt, she's seen as kind of more petty, she fails to protect her sister as we earlier discussed. And really what, a scene that was really pivotal for me was the part where she was reading a letter directly to the camera about kind of all of her grievances with those little round glasses and her shiny face. And it reminded me a lot of Winter Light, which I also struggled to relate to the female character, and particularly Ingrid Thulin's character. And she's got the exact same scene where she's reading this horrendous letter that she's written to the pastor with her petty grievances, looking directly head on to the camera, and she's wearing the same glasses, and she's that same kind of homely, sad spinster woman.
Perhaps it was the performance, though, by Ingrid Bergman that makes me feel that she is the villain in this film. It's a little bit cold, it's distant, it's very serious. Some of that partly has to do with the ambition of the character, but the way that I translated it, maybe it's a little bit of sexism on my part, I don't know, but I definitely saw that as being presented as a villain. So that said, do you think this is essential Bergman?
You know, there's certain films where I particularly struggle with this question, and this is one of them. I felt like it was a really strong film, the performances are powerful, the Bergman dynamic is interesting. But in comparison to some of his other films where I feel that they're more complex and rich, visually they're more interesting, he takes more risks with the camera, more risks with the plot. I'm torn on this one, I really don't know.
Really? I have to disagree with you. I guess you don't really have a solid position there, but I think that this is essential Bergman. I really liked the fact that Hollywood had merged with Bergman successfully for once. I really enjoyed the performance from Leave, and I think that this is perhaps one of the standouts of this time in his career. In such a moment where he was struggling with his personal life, I think that Autumn Sonata was a real return to form, and I think it was accessible, and I think a lot of people might enjoy it who might not otherwise like Bergman. So I think it is essential in many ways.
Well, I'm happy to defer to your position.
All right.
For once.
Sounds good to me. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Breaking Down Bergman. Be sure to head on over to our Facebook page and click the like button.
Or subscribe to our channel on YouTube.
And we will see you next time on Breaking Down Bergman, where we will be looking at Life of the Marionettes. And we'll see you then.